The rain came down in fine silvery threads over the ancient spires of Oxford, turning the cobblestones slick beneath the wheels of a single motor car that wound its way through the narrow lanes. The driver, a pale young man with an anxious expression, glanced repeatedly into his mirror as if pursued by ghosts. In the back seat sat a woman in evening attire, her gloved hands trembling on her lap. The clock on the dashboard showed a few minutes past 11 when the car turned toward the great iron gates of Oxford Hall, a sprawling country estate that bore the weight of centuries and secrets. Inside, laughter and music still floated faintly from the grand ballroom, but the night's gaiety would soon be swallowed by something much darker. At precisely 11:15, a gunshot cracked through the manor. The orchestra halted mid-note. Dancers froze, startled, as the echo shuddered through the marble corridors. Within moments, servants came rushing from every direction, followed by a flurry of alarmed guests. The sound had come from the west wing. The library, a long oak-panelled room seldom visited, except by the master of the house, Lord Henry Winstanley. When the heavy door was forced open, a sight of dreadful finality awaited them. Lord Winstanley lay slumped behind his desk, a revolver fallen beside his right hand, and a dark stain spreading slowly across his embroidered waistcoat. The windows were locked from within. There was no sign of intrusion, and yet something about the scene seemed too orderly, too staged to be suicide. It was the young chauffeur who noticed the detail first. On the Persian rug near the desk, just beside the pool of blood, lay a single white chess piece, a knight, carved from ivory, gleaming under the lamplight. "He never played chess," whispered Lady Eleanor, the widow, her voice barely audible. The statement only deepened the silence that followed, for indeed in all his life Lord Winstanley had preferred the hunt, the cards, and the bottle, never the board. Inspector Jameson of the Oxfordshire Constabulary arrived within the hour, his boots leaving faint mud prints on the marble as he strode toward the library. He examined the body, the weapon, the chess piece, and the locked window. Suicide seemed convenient, but Jameson's instincts rebelled. There was the position of the gun, too far from the right hand. The ink bottle knocked over on the desk as if in haste, and a half-finished letter beneath the blotter, addressed to E. The rest of the name was smudged beyond recognition. The gun was his own, the butler confirmed, kept always in the drawer of that desk. But the key to the drawer was missing. By dawn, the local papers already carried the headline "Tragedy at Oxford Hall, Lord Winstanley dead in mysterious circumstances." Whispers of scandal began to circulate. Some spoke of debts, others of a young secretary dismissed only days earlier. Yet the most curious rumour of all was that Lord Winstanley had been preparing to make an announcement that very evening, something that would have altered the inheritance of Oxford Hall. It was 2 days later that Hercule Poirot arrived, summoned by Lady Eleanor herself. The great detective, immaculate in his grey suit and patent leather shoes, stood before the ivy-clad façade of Oxford Hall, with his hat slightly tilted against the drizzle. He had read the accounts, of course, but he did not come for curiosity. "It is not the death that intrigues me," he murmured to Hastings beside him, "but the arrangement of details. There is here a mind, neat, orderly, and malicious." Inside, the atmosphere was one of strained civility. Lady Eleanor greeted Poirot with polite grief, her eyes red-rimmed yet calculating. She claimed her husband had been despondent over business failures, that he might have taken his own life out of shame. But Poirot noticed how her hands fluttered whenever she spoke of the night, never once steady. "You loved your husband, madame?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "We were companions in duty," she said finally. Poirot toured the library with Inspector Jameson, his gaze sharp and deliberate. The chess piece was still there, sealed now within a glass envelope. The knight, Poirot mused aloud, symbol of movement in strange directions. It never travels straight. He bent closer to the carpet, then to the writing desk. "The ink stain," he said softly, "was made after the fall of the pen, not before. The man was already dead when this blot was created. Someone wanted to disguise the timing." At that moment, Hastings called out from the window, "Look here, Poirot. These latches, they lock from the inside, yes, but the wood is old. One could force them shut with a wire from outside if the gap were wide enough." Poirot smiled faintly. "Excellent, mon ami. You observe as the night moves, unexpectedly." That evening Poirot requested to see all guests who had been present at the ball. There was Sir Charles Avery, a business partner, Dr. Montford, an old friend, the secretary, Mr. Leonard Hale, recently dismissed, and a young woman named Clara Dane, whose connection to the family no one seemed eager to discuss. Poirot spoke little, only listened, his grey-green eyes flicking from face to face. Each denied having entered the West Wing that night. Yet Clara Dane, in her nervousness, dropped her handkerchief, a monogrammed square with the letter E. After the interviews, Poirot stood once more in the silent library, the ticking of the grandfather clock echoing like a heartbeat. He traced a finger along the desk's edge, pausing at the drawer. The key was still missing, yes, but faint scratch marks told a different story. Someone had opened it after the murder. Inside, he found an envelope marked Property Transfer Oxford Hall. The date was the day of the ball. He turned to Hastings. You see, mon ami, this is not the crime of passion. It is the crime of inheritance. The gun was chosen, the window prepared, the clue, that poor little chess piece, us placed with purpose. We are dealing not with the chaos of despair, but with the precision of strategy. Outside, the bells of Oxford tolled midnight. The rain began again, washing the manor's ancient stones clean of their sorrow, but not their secrets. Hercule Poirot's eyes narrowed upon the darkened corridors beyond the library door. Somewhere in this house, he murmured, walks the night, and soon we shall see whose move it truly was. The next morning dawned bleak and grey over Oxford Hall, a thin mist curling over the lawns like a shroud. The household stirred uneasily, its occupants moving about with the hushed, deliberate rhythm of those living beneath suspicion. Hercule Poirot, however, appeared perfectly at ease as he took breakfast in the morning room. His plate was untouched, but his mind worked with precision, cataloguing impressions, inconsistencies, and silences. Hastings, seated across from him, watched the detective's stillness with some curiosity. "You've scarcely said a word since last night," he ventured. Poirot smiled faintly. "When the noise of others grows too loud, mon ami, it is the silence that tells the truth. There is much noise in this house, and much silence." He rose and requested to see the library once more. The constable stationed there saluted nervously as Poirot entered, his patent shoes whispering across the carpet. Nothing had changed, or so it seemed. The blood had dried into the weave of the rug. The desk stood tidily cleared except for a few papers, and the faint smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. Yet Poirot moved through the room as if seeing it for the first time. His eyes lingered not on the dramatic, the gun, the blood, the window, but on the ordinary, the dust on the bookshelf, the angle of the chair, the faint impression on the armrest where a hand had rested recently. He bent down near the fireplace and retrieved something small from the ashtray, a sliver of blue sealing wax barely visible against the dark marble. He held it up to the light, murmuring to himself, "Blue, yet the Winstanley seal is always red. Curious, non?" Inspector Jameson, who had entered just behind him, frowned. "You think it matters? The old man received letters daily. Maybe one had blue wax." Poirot only smiled politely. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the hand that brought the letter did not intend it to be found." As they spoke, the maid, Alice, entered to dust the shelves. She avoided looking at the body's former place, though her trembling hands betrayed her distress. Poirot turned gently toward her. "You were on duty the night of the ball, mademoiselle?" She nodded. "Yes, sir, I was helping in the dining room." Poirot's gaze softened. "And afterward, when the gunshot came, what did you do?" She hesitated. I was near the corridor that leads to the West Wing. I ran toward the sound, but Miss Dane was already there. She looked frightened. She told me to fetch help." Poirot's expression did not change, but a faint gleam came into his eyes. "Miss Dane was first to arrive, before the butler?" The girl nodded, uncertain. "Yes, sir. She said she had been looking for Lord Winstanley. He had promised to speak with her." Poirot thanked her and dismissed her kindly. When she'd gone, Jameson muttered, "That girl Clara Dane, she's lying about something. You can see it." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps. But remember, mon cher, a lie may serve to conceal not guilt, but fear. Let us find what she fears." He asked then to see Lady Eleanor once more. She awaited him in her morning room wearing black silk and pearls, her eyes hollow with sleeplessness. The scent of lavender clung to the air. Poirot bowed slightly. "Madam, forgive my intrusion so early. I have but one question. The chess piece. You are certain it belonged not to your husband? She inclined her head stiffly. Quite certain. My husband hated games of intellect. He used to say they were for men who did not know how to live. Poirot studied her for a moment longer, his gaze resting on a small table beside her. Upon it, a crystal decanter, a glass half full, and beneath the glass a faint ring on the wood, as if another had stood there before. "You entertained guests this morning?" he asked mildly. She looked startled. "No, I was alone." Poirot's tone was pleasant, almost distracted. "Ah, then perhaps it was yesterday. My mistake." But Hastings, watching from the doorway, noticed that Lady Eleanor's hand tightened around the stem of the glass. Poirot and Hastings left the room, and in the corridor Hastings exhaled. "You think she's hiding something?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Mais oui, but what interests me more is how she hides it. You saw, she lied without blinking, but her body betrayed her. It is a game, Hastings, and at Oxford Hall everyone is playing." In the afternoon, Poirot sought out Mr. Leonard Hale, the dismissed secretary. The young man had been kept under informal watch in the servants' wing. He was thin, pale and nervous, his fingers perpetually twitching at his cuffs. "They say you quarrelled with Lord Winstanley," Poirot began without preamble, "that he dismissed you over an impropriety." Hale flushed. "He accused me of stealing documents, but I didn't. They were missing before I even knew about them." "What documents?" asked Poirot. Hale hesitated, then said quietly, "Property contracts. There was talk he meant to sell part of the estate, but I think he was being blackmailed." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And you, Monsieur Hale? Were you the instrument or the victim of that blackmail?" The young man looked horrified. "Neither. I swear it. I tried to warn him, but he wouldn't listen. He said—" He stopped suddenly, his mouth snapping shut. "He said what?" Poirot asked softly. "Nothing," Hale muttered. "It was nothing." Poirot said nothing more, but as they left he murmured to Hastings, "The young man is loyal, but loyalty is a dangerous thing. It ties the tongue even when the heart wishes to speak." That evening, as the rain began once more, Poirot returned to the library with a small magnifying lens. The constables had retired for supper. The room was silent, save for the steady ticking of the clock. He examined again the space around the desk, the carpet, the bookshelf. Near the baseboard, almost invisible, he discovered a faint line of wax, the same shade of blue as the fragment found earlier. He traced its path along the wood until it disappeared behind the curtains near the window. He pulled them aside and smiled. There, half hidden behind the heavy velvet, was a small, narrow envelope, its seal broken, its contents gone. Hastings gasped softly. "Someone searched here after the murder." Poirot nodded. "Oui, and what they sought, they found." He replaced the curtain and stood very still, his gaze thoughtful. "You see, Hastings, a murderer must always touch what he fears. He cannot resist returning to the scene, if only to ensure his illusion remains intact." They heard a sound then, a floorboard creaking just beyond the door. Poirot turned sharply, his eyes bright. The handle moved slightly, then stilled. "Do not follow," he whispered. "Not yet. The game is not ready to end." He straightened his cuffs, his voice calm once more. "We shall leave the night where it stands. But soon, Hastings. The next move will belong to me." Outside, the rain beat harder against the windows, and in its rhythm Poirot heard the shape of deceit, measured, deliberate, and very near. The following morning the fog over Oxford Hall had thickened into a pale curtain that clung to the windows, muting the world into a quiet grey haze. Inside, the air was heavy with unease. The servants moved in whispers, glancing at one another as if each feared what the other might know. Hercule Poirot, immaculately dressed as ever, stood near the drawing-room fire, his gaze calm but unyielding. One by one he had summoned those who had been present on the night of Lord Winstanley's death. It was time, he said, for everyone to speak plainly. Yet plainness was the one thing no one in Oxford Hall seemed capable of. Sir Charles Avery was the first to appear, a tall man with the reddish face of a lifelong gambler, and the air of one too accustomed to controlling his surroundings. He took the armchair opposite Poirot, crossing his legs with deliberate ease. "I've already told Inspector Jameson all I know, Monsieur Poirot," he began with a note of irritation. "I left the ballroom around 11 to make a telephone call. My alibi is quite verifiable. I spoke with my secretary in London." Poirot nodded, unbothered. "Oui, so I have been told. And yet, It was from that same corridor that one could reach the library unnoticed. Sir Charles's brows furrowed. I had no reason to go there. I despised the man, if you must know, but murder is a poor way to settle debts. Poirot leaned slightly forward. Debts, you say? Of honour or of money? Sir Charles hesitated, then smiled thinly. Both, perhaps. He owed me a sum he promised to repay this month. I imagine now I shall have to settle for disappointment. Poirot regarded him steadily, then let the silence stretch until Sir Charles shifted uncomfortably. You're a man of chance, Sir Charles, Poirot said softly, but you play the cards only when you believe the odds are in your favour. It would not suit such a man to kill before the debt was repaid. Sir Charles exhaled sharply, half relief, half irritation. You have a curious way of complimenting people, monsieur. Poirot inclined his head. I speak only the truth, even when it sounds like philosophy. When Sir Charles departed, Poirot turned his gaze toward the doorway, where Clara Dane stood waiting, pale and tense. Her hands clutched a folded handkerchief, twisting it nervously as she entered. She avoided his eyes at first, but Poirot's tone was gentle, almost paternal. Mademoiselle, you were fond of Lord Winstanley? Her voice trembled. I respected him. He was kind to me, treated me as family. Poirot's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened slightly. And yet, you were dismissed once, were you not? Some quarrel? She looked startled. How did you— It wasn't a quarrel exactly. Lady Eleanor thought my presence unnecessary. Unnecessary? Poirot repeated softly. Or inconvenient? She looked away. She believed I cared for Lord Winstanley more than propriety allowed. Her voice faltered on the last words. Poirot waited, allowing the silence to draw her thoughts into confession. But she was wrong, she added quickly. He only tried to help me. I was desperate then. He was arranging a position for me elsewhere. Poirot nodded, but his gaze lingered on the small tremor in her hand. And what of the letter he wrote that night? You were the E, perhaps? Her head jerked up. No, I swear it! I know nothing of any letter. Her denial was too swift, too rehearsed. Poirot merely smiled, thanked her, and dismissed her kindly. As she left, Hastings whispered, She's hiding something. Poirot nodded slowly. Ah, yes, but not guilt, I think. Shame, perhaps, or fear. Next came Dr. Montford, who entered with an easy manner and a practised calmness that struck Poirot as studied. A dreadful affair, the doctor said at once, lowering himself into the chair. But tragic though it is, I'm afraid it was inevitable. Henry's heart was weak, and his mind weaker still. Poirot raised an eyebrow. You believe it was suicide, then? What else? The pressure of debts, the quarrels with Lady Eleanor, his drinking, all the signs were there. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. And yet, Doctor, you were one of the first to reach the body. You examined him before the police arrived. Naturally, Montford said, frowning slightly, it was my duty as a physician. But you declared death instantaneous, did you not? Yes, a single gunshot to the chest. Poirot's eyes glinted. And yet, Doctor, you failed to notice the faint burn on the right sleeve, powder residue that suggests the gun was fired at close range but not by his own hand. The doctor stiffened. You're accusing me of negligence? Poirot smiled faintly. No, merely observation. You see, the truth often hides behind the haste of those too eager to explain. The doctor rose abruptly, muttering about impertinence, and left the room. Hastings watched him go. That man's temper doesn't suit his profession, he said quietly. Poirot adjusted his cuffs. Nor does his precision. A man of medicine who forgets a detail of death is like a clock that keeps perfect time, but rings the wrong hour. By late afternoon, Poirot had spoken with nearly everyone. Servants, guests, even the gardener who claimed to have seen a shadow near the west wing that night. Each story differed in small ways. The time they heard the gunshot, who was in the corridor, when the lights flickered. Lady Eleanor insisted she was in the ballroom all along, yet one servant placed her near the terrace shortly before the shot. Sir Charles swore he saw Clara Dane crying in the corridor before midnight, though Clara denied leaving the ballroom until after the alarm. The contradictions began to form a quiet pattern, like a puzzle emerging from scattered pieces. The truth was not yet visible, but its outline was. When evening came, Poirot sat once more in the library, alone save for Hastings. The fire had burned low, and the smell of smoke mingled with the faint scent of ink and old wood. Hastings looked weary. "They can't all be lying, surely," Poirot smiled thinly. "But they are, mon ami, each one in their own little way. Lies are like perfume, applied differently, but all to mask something unpleasant." He rose and examined the envelope he had found behind the curtain. Someone retrieved what this once held. The question is, who would risk entering the library after the body was discovered? Only one who had left something here, something dangerous. He turned toward the door, his voice quiet but certain. "Tomorrow we shall look again at that which everyone has seen, but no one has understood. Already the pieces begin to move." At that moment a faint sound echoed down the corridor, the soft click of a door closing. Poirot glanced toward it, eyes narrowing. "You? Here, Hastings. Even now the night makes its play, but the board— Ah! The board remains mine." The following day broke cold and brittle, the mist having thinned into a pale, reluctant sunlight that did little to warm the air within Oxford Hall. The house, vast and echoing, seemed to breathe uneasily, as though aware that something within its walls still festered unseen. Hercule Poirot, seated at the small desk in his guest room, examined a sheet of notes written in his neat, compact script. Names, times, and tiny arrows crisscrossed the page, a web of contradictions so delicately balanced that one false thread might unravel the entire pattern. Hastings stood by the window, restless as ever, glancing toward the courtyard where Inspector Jameson directed constables in perfunctory searches. "They'll never find anything out there," Hastings muttered. "Whoever did this was too clever to leave footprints." Poirot smiled faintly without looking up. "Ah, mon ami, cleverness leaves its own kind of footprints. The trick is not to search for what is visible, but for what insists on being hidden." He placed the paper aside and rose. "Come, Hastings. It is time we look once more at the human heart. It is always there, in the little motives that truth begins to whisper." Downstairs, the drawing-room had been turned into a sort of waiting chamber. Lady Eleanor sat nearest the fire, pale and elegant in mourning black, her eyes sharp despite the shadows beneath them. Sir Charles lounged nearby, his air one of bored irritation, while Dr. Montfort and Clara Dane occupied opposite corners of the room, each avoiding the other's gaze. Poirot's entrance drew a subtle shift in the air. Conversations died, postures stiffened. He smiled courteously, the very picture of calm authority. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began softly, "you are all most gracious to indulge my little inquiries. You see, I am like the gardener who waters every plant, even the weeds, until he sees which will grow." Sir Charles gave a short, dismissive laugh. "I suppose we're the weeds, then?" Poirot's eyes glinted. "Some of you, perhaps, grow in very curious soil." He moved to the centre of the room, clasping his hands behind his back. "Let us speak plainly, yes? There are 4 motives that bind you all to Lord Winstanley: greed, revenge, jealousy, and fear. Each of you has a little portion, but none alone can explain what happened that night. Allow me to show you." He turned first towards Sir Charles. "You, monsieur, had debts of your own, n'est-ce pas? Lord Winstanley owed you money, but also held a share in your trading company. His death, you thought, would ruin you, yet curiously, within 24 hours, your solicitor telephoned London. The shares have transferred, legally to your name, an arrangement made, it seems, the day before his death." Sir Charles's ruddy face tightened. "That was business, Poirot. The man signed willingly." "Ah, yes," Poirot murmured. "But willingly to what end? A desperate man does not yield power. He clings to it. Unless, of course, someone persuaded him otherwise." Sir Charles leaned forward. "If you're implying I forced his hand—" Non, Poirot interrupted lightly. "I imply only that you gave him reason to believe his death would not end the matter." Lady Eleanor's eyes flicked briefly towards Sir Charles, a movement small as a breath, yet Poirot caught it at once. He turned to her, his tone gentler now. "Madame, you have endured much. A husband unkind, perhaps unfaithful, yet you remained. Such devotion must have its price." Her chin lifted slightly. "I stayed because marriage is duty, Monsieur Poirot, that's all," Poirot smiled. "Ah, but duty so often conceals despair. You inherited nothing by his death, did you not? The estate passes to a distant cousin." A faint tremor passed through her composure. "My husband managed our affairs as he saw fit," she said coldly. I had no say in such matters. And yet, Poirot said softly, on the night he died, you stood by the terrace, waiting for someone. The maid saw you. Whom did you wait for? Your husband? Or perhaps another? Her lips parted, then closed again. You presume too much. Perhaps, Poirot said with a little bow, but presumption is sometimes the friend of truth. He turned next to Dr. Montfort, whose expression had grown increasingly strained. And you, Doctor, you have known the family for years, almost as kin. You treated Lord Winstanley, yes, but also advised him on matters outside medicine. It is said you invested for him. A few ventures, nothing more, Montfort replied stiffly. Poirot nodded. Indeed. And yet, these ventures, how unfortunate that they failed, and that the money vanished so quietly. Perhaps your patient discovered this. Perhaps the blue-sealed letter we found once contained his accusation. Montfort's face flushed crimson. Rubbish! You have no proof. Non, Poirot agreed calmly, not yet. But the proof is like perfume, Doctor. One may not see it, but the scent remains. Lastly, Poirot's gaze rested upon Clara Dane. She looked smaller under his scrutiny, her delicate hands twisting once more in her lap. Mademoiselle, you were fond of the late Lord Winstanley, I think. Perhaps too fond, yes. She met his gaze, her voice breaking slightly. He wanted to help me, that's all. He said he'd settle money for me before the season ended, so I could leave this place. He meant it kindly. And Lady Eleanor objected? She misunderstood, Clara whispered. She thought there was something between us. Poirot tilted his head. And was there? She hesitated just a fraction too long. No. You lie badly, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. But perhaps your lie is not the dangerous one. Perhaps it was he who made promises he could not keep. The affection of a young woman is a dangerous thing, especially when it meets the pride of a wife. The room had grown very still. Only the fire crackled, and the ticking of the clock punctuated the silence. Poirot let it linger, then spoke again, softer, almost to himself. So, the web spins itself. Sir Charles, who gains by the estate. Lady Eleanor, who loses yet hides her heart. Dr. Montfort, whose ruin hides behind false accounts. And Mademoiselle Dane, whose love, or resentment, burns quietly beneath her tears. Each could have killed him, each had reason. Yet one fact remains. Only one person returned here, after the death, to retrieve that missing letter. He withdrew a small slip of paper from his pocket, the scrap of blue sealing wax. This colour, he said, is rare in England. Only one of you uses it. And last night, in the waste bin of Dr. Montfort's room, I found the remains of such wax, melted, broken. Perhaps, Doctor, you burned a letter, one written by your late friend? Montfort's mouth opened, then closed again. It was a personal matter, he muttered. A note he left for me. Indeed? Poirot said mildly. A note of gratitude, perhaps? Or of blackmail? Before Montfort could reply, Lady Eleanor rose abruptly. You've no right to torment us with your insinuations, she cried, her voice trembling with fury. You make puppets of us all. Poirot turned to her, his voice now calm as the surface of still water. Madame, I torment no one. I simply follow the motive to its source, and when one pulls upon the right thread, the whole tapestry moves. She stared at him, then turned away, her shoulders rigid. Sir Charles muttered something under his breath. Clara began to cry quietly. Poirot sighed and looked toward Hastings. You see, mon ami, he murmured, each heart conceals its own crime, even if it is not the crime of murder. But one of these hearts beats out of rhythm with the others, and soon we shall hear its false note. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the windows of the ancient hall. Somewhere in that trembling sound, Poirot felt the shape of the truth drawing nearer, elusive still, but inevitable, like the next move in a game already decided. It was just after dawn when Inspector Jameson burst into the drawing-room, a triumphant gleam in his eyes, and a folded document clutched tightly in his hand. Hercule Poirot, already seated at the breakfast table with Hastings, raised an eyebrow at the intrusion. You look, my dear Inspector, like a man who has found the missing piece of his jigsaw, he observed mildly. Jameson, breathing hard from excitement, laid the paper down with a flourish. Found, yes, and it fits perfectly. The case is solved, Monsieur Poirot, we've got him. Hastings blinked. Who? Dr. Montford, Jameson said with satisfaction. We found this in his desk, a copy of Lord Winstanley's will along with a draft letter threatening to expose him for embezzlement. Motive, means, opportunity. It's all there. Poirot regarded the paper in silence, his fingertips pressed together. Jameson continued eagerly. You were right about the money. Montford lost nearly £15,000 of Winstanley's fortune in a fraudulent investment. When the old man found out, he planned to report him. Montford panicked, killed him, and staged the suicide. It's neat as a pin. Hastings nodded. Seems straightforward enough, Poirot. You can't deny it fits. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, mon ami, neatness is not always the companion of truth. Tell me, Inspector, this will... It is typed, yes? Yes. Found among Montford's papers in his study. And signed? No, unsigned. But the handwriting matches the late lord's on the margin notes. Poirot rose, moving to the window where pale light filtered through the drapes. Unsigned, unsealed, and conveniently found the morning after I accused the good doctor. That, my friend, is what you call theatrical timing. Jameson frowned. You think it's planted? I think, Poirot replied softly, that when evidence appears too easily it usually walks on stage to distract the audience from the real play. By mid-morning the entire house buzzed with rumour. Constables escorted Dr. Montford from his quarters, the man protesting furiously, his face pale with indignation. Lady Eleanor appeared at the head of the staircase, one hand clutching the banister. You cannot arrest him, she said sharply. He has attended this family for years. Jameson barely paused. I'm afraid the law takes precedence over sentiment, madam. Sentiment? She repeated coldly. You mistake me. I speak of prudence. He knows our affairs better than anyone alive. If he wished to destroy us, he could have done it long ago. Her voice trembled only slightly as she turned away, leaving Poirot watching her with quiet interest. In the courtyard, as Montford was led to the police car, Clara Dane broke free from a cluster of servants and ran after him. He didn't do it, she cried. He told me himself. He only tried to help Lord Winstanley. He was frightened, but he wasn't a killer. The constables restrained her gently, and Jameson motioned for her to be taken inside. Poirot, standing in the doorway, murmured under his breath, How curious. Fear makes one silent, except when it becomes unbearable. Later that day, the inspector returned, still flushed with confidence. Montford's confession is practically written in his face, he declared. We found traces of blue sealing wax in his grate, and the maid swears she saw him near the west corridor at 11:30. Hastings looked impressed. That's the time of the shot, isn't it? Exactly, said Jameson. It's open and shut. Poirot said nothing for a long moment. Then, in his gentle, almost detached way, he asked, Tell me, Inspector, this maid, Alice, I believe, she saw the doctor at 11:30, yes? Was that before or after she heard the shot? Before, she says. Just before. Ah! Poirot's eyes softened, his tone musing. Then the good doctor, walking toward the west corridor at 11:30, was moving not toward danger, but toward a rendezvous. Yet with whom? Jameson frowned. You're overcomplicating it, Poirot. He's our man. Poirot inclined his head slightly. Perhaps. Yet even the most guilty man leaves behind traces of innocence, if one looks closely enough. That evening, Poirot asked to see Lady Eleanor privately. She received him in her sitting room, firelight flickering against her pale face. You have come to congratulate me, Monsieur Poirot. It seems your services are no longer needed. Poirot bowed. Ah, madame, I do not congratulate before the curtain falls. I simply wish to understand. You were very quick to defend Dr. Montford this morning. Her lips tightened. Because I know him, and I know Henry. My husband was a cruel man when crossed. Poirot's gaze did not waver. Cruel men inspire both love and vengeance, madame. Forgive me, but which did you feel? She looked away. Neither. Only exhaustion. After a moment she added quietly, Henry was to make changes to his will. He meant to punish me, to leave everything to that girl. To Mademoiselle Dane? Poirot asked softly. Yes, she flattered him, and he believed her innocent. He was a fool. Poirot's voice was mild, almost kind. And yet, you were the one who told me you were in the ballroom all evening. The servant, however, placed you on the terrace just before the gunshot. She stiffened. colour rising faintly in her cheeks. "I went out for air. The room was stifling." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "And did you see anyone?" "No one." "Not even the doctor passing toward the west wing?" She hesitated, then said quickly, "If I had, I would have said so." Poirot smiled faintly. "Indeed. Forgive me, madame, you're right. It is sometimes better to say nothing at all." When he left her, Hastings followed him down the corridor, whispering urgently, "Poirot, you think she's involved, don't you?" Poirot's expression was unreadable. "I think, mon ami, that Lady Eleanor has the rare talent of speaking in riddles while appearing perfectly frank. And I think, too, that the person who killed Lord Winstanley has just begun to feel safe. That is when they become careless." The following morning, the newspapers declared the Oxford Hall murder solved. Local physician arrested. Poirot read the headline at breakfast, his expression unreadable. "Ah, the English love of finality," he murmured, "even when the book is only half written." Jameson, flushed with satisfaction, packed his files and announced he would be escorting the prisoner to Oxford for formal questioning. "You can relax now, Poirot," he said cheerfully. "You've earned your rest." Poirot inclined his head. "Rest is for the innocent, Inspector. The guilty, they rarely sleep well." When the police car departed down the long gravel drive, the house seemed to exhale. Servants moved with cautious relief. Conversation returned to corners and corridors. Yet Poirot remained by the window, his eyes on the distant gates, his mind far from the moment's peace. He had seen, just before the car disappeared, a small detail that others had missed. A figure on the balcony above, watching silently. Clara Dane, her face pale as the morning sky, her hand gripping the rail. Not in sorrow, but in something sharper, something close to dread. Poirot's gaze lingered there, his voice soft as he spoke to Hastings beside him. "They believe the curtain has fallen, but the play, it continues. The night has moved, yes, but the king is still in peril." He turned away, eyes narrowing slightly. "There will be another act, mon ami, and when it begins, it will not be the doctor who takes the stage." The calm that followed Dr. Montford's arrest did not last long. By the third evening the mist had returned, pressing against the windows of Oxford Hall like a patient intruder. Poirot sat by the library fire, the crackle of wood echoing faintly through the silence. Hastings, half asleep in a chair, stirred when the detective spoke his name softly. "Hastings, do you recall the expression on Mademoiselle Dane's face when they took the doctor away?" Hastings frowned. "She looked frightened, yes, but not of him. Almost guilty, perhaps." Poirot smiled. "Non, not guilty. Haunted. There is a difference." He rose, pacing the room in slow, measured steps. "Something from the past stirs among these people. This murder, mon ami, did not begin 2 nights ago. It began years before, perhaps before any of them set foot in Oxford Hall." He moved to the desk where Lord Winstanley's papers had been stacked neatly by the constables. Poirot lifted one folder, its edges yellowed. "Regard, Hastings. Correspondence from the late Lord Solicitor, dated 1918. A matter of guardianship." "Guardianship?" "Oui. It concerns one Clara Dane. She was not merely a distant cousin or companion. She was once his ward, taken from an orphanage in London after her parents perished in a fire." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And the signature upon these letters? Dr. Montford, then a young physician at the same orphanage. You see, our players have met before." Hastings sat up straight. "Good Lord, Poirot, so they've all been connected far longer than anyone admitted." "Precisely. And it explains many things. The doctor's anxiety, the lady's jealousy, the girl's silence. The threads of yesterday always tug upon the crimes of today." A soft knock interrupted. Them. It was Alice, the maid, pale and nervous. She held a folded note. "Miss Dane asked me to give you this, sir. She said you'd understand." Poirot took it gently, nodding his thanks. The handwriting was hurried, uneven. "Meet me in the chapel at midnight. There is something you must know. C." When Hastings protested, Poirot merely said, "The chapel is the heart of every old English house, where the living pretend to pray and the dead truly listen. Come, mon ami, we shall pray for the truth." The small stone chapel lay at the edge of the estate, its door swollen with damp. Inside, the air smelled of wax and dust. A single candle flickered near the altar, and beside it stood Clara Dane, her face ghost-white in the wavering light. "I shouldn't have written," she whispered. "They watch everything here." "Then speak quickly, mademoiselle," said Poirot gently. "Who watches?" "Lady Eleanor," she breathed. "She knows I found something in Lord Winstanley's desk before the police came. It was a letter, very old, with blue sealing wax. It wasn't about money. It was about my parents. He wasn't my guardian, Monsieur Poirot. He was my father." Hastings drew a sharp breath. "You mean—" She nodded, trembling. "My mother worked here as a maid. She died in that fire years ago. He hid the truth to protect his name. Lady Eleanor knew and hated me for it. That's why she wanted me gone." Poirot's expression softened, but his eyes burned with focus. "And the letter?" "Gone. Someone took it the night of the murder. But I saw it. His signature, his confession. He meant to tell everyone that night, before the guests. He said he was tired of lies." She looked toward the dark doorway. "I think Lady Eleanor killed him before he could speak." Before Poirot could reply, a faint metallic sound echoed from the corridor, a door handle turning slowly. The candle quivered. Poirot gestured for silence, and they waited, breath held. But only the wind moved. When they stepped outside moments later, the path was empty, the fog swallowing everything beyond a few feet. Back in the library, Poirot poured Clara a small glass of brandy and dismissed her for the night. When she was gone, Hastings whispered, "You believe her?" Poirot tapped his chin. "She believes herself, which is not the same thing. The letter may exist, but perhaps not as she remembers. Still, it explains why the killer feared discovery. This is not merely murder, it is legacy, scandal, inheritance." He crossed to the bookshelf, his gaze drifting over the rows until he stopped at a narrow gap where dust had been disturbed. Sliding out a thick volume of parish registers, he opened it upon the desk. There, among brittle pages, was an entry written in a fine, elegant hand. Baptism. Clara Dane, child of Henry Winstanley and Eliza Hale. Witnesses, Charles Avery, Eleanor Hale. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. "Do you see, Hastings? Lady Eleanor was born Hale, the sister of Eliza. She was not merely jealous of the girl, she was her aunt. And Sir Charles, witness to the baptism, also knew." Hastings stared. "So they've all been lying, every last one." "Oui. They are bound by a secret of blood and betrayal. Lord Winstanley's confession would have ruined them all." A sudden gust flung the library door inward. Lady Eleanor stood there, pale and rigid. "You pry too deeply, Monsieur Poirot." He inclined his head. "It is my habit, madame. One must dig to find roots, especially when the tree is poisoned." Her composure cracked. For a fleeting instant the anguish beneath her cold façade showed through. "You don't understand," she said hoarsely. "He destroyed everything he touched. My sister, that girl's life, mine. He thought confession would cleanse him, but it would have damned us all." Poirot's voice was soft. "So you silenced him instead?" She met his gaze for a long moment, then turned away. "I am not a murderer, Monsieur Poirot, but there are some sins a family must bury." When she left, Hastings whispered, "Do you think she's telling the truth?" Poirot's eyes followed her shadow until it vanished down the corridor. "The truth, Hastings, is like the fog outside. It reveals only what it chooses for a moment before it hides it again. But I begin to see the shape beneath. This was never about money. It was about the past returning to collect its debt." He closed the register softly and extinguished the lamp. "Tomorrow we shall confirm one last detail. When we do, the shadows of the past will no longer hide the hand that pulled the trigger." Outside, the wind sighed through the chimneys, and Oxford Hall settled once more into uneasy silence, a house waiting, as it had for years, for the truth to come knocking. The next morning arrived with the brittle stillness that follows a storm. Oxford Hall seemed to hold its breath. Servants spoke in murmurs, doors closed softly, and even the clocks ticked, as though wary of being overheard. Hercule Poirot sat alone in the library, a small notebook open before him. The fire burned low, its light throwing restless shadows across the panelled walls. On the table beside him rested an odd assortment of objects, a chess piece, a candle stub, and a single wine-glass. Hastings, upon entering, blinked in confusion. "What on earth are you doing, Poirot? Setting up a séance?" Poirot smiled faintly, the corners of his moustache twitching. Not a séance, mon ami, a performance. The final act before the curtain rises on the truth. Hastings frowned. You're planning something, then? Always, Poirot murmured, but this, Hastings, requires a touch of theatre and a little science. He gestured toward the objects. The human heart, you see, reveals itself not under interrogation, but under illusion. When the mind believes it is in control, it relaxes, and the truth slips out unnoticed. He rose, straightened his cuffs, and rang for a footman. Please inform Lady Eleanor, Sir Charles, and Mademoiselle Dane that I request their company here within the hour, he instructed. Ah, and perhaps a decanter of port. One cannot uncover truth upon an empty palate. When they arrived, they found the room strangely arranged. The curtains were half drawn, muting the daylight to a soft amber glow. Poirot stood by the hearth, his hands folded while Hastings sat quietly at the far end of the room. The chess-piece gleamed faintly upon the desk. "My friends," Poirot began with his usual courtesy, "forgive this intrusion upon your morning. I have asked you here for a small experiment. Nothing dangerous, I assure you." Sir Charles snorted softly. "An experiment? Have we not endured enough of those?" Poirot inclined his head. "Ah, but this one, monsieur, will require no confession, no accusation. Only a test of the nerves, and perhaps of memory." He gestured toward the table. "You see before you certain objects, the last witnesses of Lord Winstanley's life. Each of you will approach, look closely, and tell me what you notice. Nothing more." Lady Eleanor regarded him coolly. "You think this will bring him back to life?" Poirot's smile did not falter. "Non, madame, but it may awaken something equally revealing." He began with Clara Dane, whose hands trembled as she approached the table. She looked at the chess-piece, then the glass. "It's the same piece I saw that night," she said softly. "The night. It was by his hand." "Très bien," said Poirot. "And the glass?" She hesitated. "There were 2 glasses on the desk that night. One was gone when the police arrived." Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, the missing glass. A small detail, but one that puzzled me greatly." Sir Charles was next. He stepped forward with an air of irritation. "Looks like a child's trick, this. A knight, a candle, and a glass." "If you're suggesting they prove anything—" "I suggest nothing," Poirot interrupted gently. "I only observe. The knight, you see, is carved from ivory, imported from Calcutta, quite rare. Yet one identical to it was found last year in a case in London, a robbery. The name attached to that case? Yours, Sir Charles." Sir Charles froze, his colour rising. "That's absurd. I've never—" "Mais oui, I do not accuse, only remark. Still, it is curious, is it not? 2 identical pieces, 2 deaths. For the collector of curiosities, coincidence is sometimes fatal." Lady Eleanor gave a sharp laugh, brittle and cold. "You mean to entertain us, Monsieur Poirot, or frighten us?" Poirot turned toward her, eyes gleaming. "Ah, madame, you are not easily frightened, I think. Yet I wonder, would you permit me a very small indulgence? A candle, for instance?" Without waiting for reply, he struck a match and lit the stub of wax on the table. The flame flared, throwing wavering light over her face. Poirot reached for the chess-piece and held it close to the heat. Slowly, faint blue streaks appeared along its surface, melted residue from sealing wax. Lady Eleanor's composure wavered for the briefest instant. Poirot saw it. The tightening of her throat, the flicker of her eyes toward the window. "This," he said softly, "was not merely an ornament. It once sealed an envelope. The same blue wax found in the grate of Dr. Montford's room, and upon the letter that vanished." Hastings leaned forward. "Good heavens, Poirot. You mean—" Poirot raised a hand. "Shh, mon ami. The truth has its own tempo." He set the knight down carefully. "Now, madame, one last test. Will you be so kind as to hold the glass?" Lady Eleanor hesitated, then complied. Poirot's tone was light, conversational. "A small detail, you see. Lord Winstanley was right-handed. Yet the fingerprints on his glass, the one found upon his desk, belonged to someone left-handed. And you, madame, lift your glass, thus—" She froze mid-motion. The faintest tremor betrayed her. Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice until only she could hear. "You tried to make it look as though he drank alone. But there were 2 glasses that night, yours and his. When you replaced one, you forgot the hand that held it." A hush fell across the room. Lady Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came. Sir Charles muttered under his breath, shifting uneasily. Clara Dane's eyes were wide with shock. Poirot stepped back, his tone returning to its calm neutrality. "Ah, but I do not accuse. Not yet. You see, I believe that night was not murder in cold blood, but an act born of desperation. The letter, the confession, the inheritance. All threads of one tapestry woven long ago. The person who killed Lord Winstanley did not do so for money alone, but to prevent the past from rising." Lady Eleanor's voice, when it came, was strained but steady. "You have no proof?" "None." Poirot's eyes softened. "No, madame. Not yet. But soon, when I find the missing letter, the proof will speak for itself, and I believe," he turned toward the door, "it waits for us not in the present, but in the chapel." He extinguished the candle with a single breath. The smoke rose in a thin spiral, curling like the ghost of a question. Lady Eleanor turned away sharply, her composure gone for a moment, one hand pressed to her temple, as though the walls themselves had begun to close in. As she left, Poirot watched her with a quiet melancholy. "You see, Hastings," he murmured, "the truth never shouts. It whispers, and those who are guilty, they hear it loudest of all." Outside, the wind gathered once more around Oxford Hall, sweeping across the lawns toward the distant chapel, and somewhere beyond that grey mist, the last, most dangerous piece of the game waited to be found. Night fell hard over Oxford Hall, bringing with it a stillness that felt unnatural, almost deliberate. The fog thickened again, swallowing the grounds until even the chapel's pointed roof disappeared into the haze. Inside, the lamps burned low. The manor, vast and half asleep, seemed to be waiting for something. Hercule Poirot sat in the library, his small frame perfectly upright, his fingertips resting lightly upon the desk where the ivory knight still gleamed. He had not spoken for nearly an hour. Hastings, pacing the floor, finally broke the silence. "You're certain the missing letter is in the chapel?" he asked. Poirot nodded, his eyes distant. "Certain, mon ami. There is a pattern here. The killer hides behind symbols. The night, the wax, the fire, always an echo of the past. Where better to conceal confession than where sins are forgiven?" Before Hastings could reply, a knock came. It was Alice, the maid, pale and anxious. "Beg pardon, sir. You said you wanted to know if anyone went near the chapel tonight." Poirot turned sharply. "Yes?" "I saw someone just now crossing the courtyard. Looked like a woman, sir, wore a cloak." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah! The game quickens. Hastings, vite, we go." They stepped out into the wet night, their lamps throwing narrow beams through the mist. The air smelled of rain and earth. The chapel loomed ahead, its stained glass windows dull as stone. The door creaked open under Poirot's hand, and the smell of wax and dust rushed out. Inside, all was still, until Hastings' light swept across the altar and froze. The candle they had seen last night was overturned, its wax spilled like pale blood. The floor was scattered with fragments of charred paper. Poirot bent swiftly, his gloved fingers brushing through the ash. The pieces were too small to read, but he recognised the faint blue of sealing wax melted among them. "Burned," Hastings breathed. "The letter's gone." Poirot did not move for several moments. The silence deepened save for the faint drip of rain through the old roof. Then he rose, his expression unreadable. "Not gone, Hastings. Destroyed, but not forgotten." He turned slowly, his lamp sweeping over the room. "Observe, the fire was small, hurried. The culprit feared discovery. And here, see how the wax melted upon the stone. That means the paper was burned only minutes ago." "So whoever did it is still nearby," Hastings exclaimed. Poirot's gaze flicked to the open window, its frame streaked with rain. "Precisely, but not by accident. The letter was not merely destroyed, it was silenced." They moved back toward the door, and as they stepped into the courtyard, they heard the crunch of gravel. A figure moved through the fog, cloak trailing. Poirot called out sharply, "Halt!" The figure froze, then bolted toward the stables. Hastings gave chase, but by the time he reached the gate, the mist swallowed everything. Only a faint smell of perfume lingered, the same delicate scent Lady Eleanor always wore. When Hastings returned, breathless, Poirot was standing motionless under the dripping arch. "She was watching the chapel," Hastings said. "She knew we'd find the ashes." Poirot nodded slowly. "Oui, but she was not alone. They returned to the hall, and Poirot asked that everyone be gathered in the drawing-room. One by one they arrived, Lady Eleanor pale and composed, Sir Charles flushed with drink, Clara Dane wide-eyed and silent. The air in the room felt heavy, expectant. Poirot regarded them quietly before speaking. "Mes amis, I regret to say that a most precious piece of evidence has been destroyed. The letter that would have told us the truth is no more." Lady Eleanor's voice, cool and sharp, broke the silence. "Then perhaps, Monsieur Poirot, you should accept that there is no truth to be found. Some things are better left to die." Poirot bowed slightly. "Ah, but the truth, madame, does not die. It only hides. And those who bury it must one day meet it again." Her gaze flickered, but she said nothing. Sir Charles shifted in his chair, muttering, "More riddles? Perhaps you'd like to accuse us all, just to be safe." Poirot smiled faintly. "No need, monsieur. I already know which of you fears me most." He turned his attention back to the table where the chess piece lay. "When the letter burned, the wax melted, but not all of it. I found a small trace upon the chapel floor. It bears a mark, a crest. The Winstanley seal, yes, but broken through with another imprint, faint yet visible. It is the seal of Sir Charles Avery." The man's face blanched. "You can't prove that. My seal's been missing for days. Stolen, I tell you." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Stolen indeed. Like the key to the library drawer, like the second wineglass, like the truth itself. Always stolen, never found." Lady Eleanor rose suddenly, her composure cracking. "Enough. You cannot drag us through this again. Henry is dead, the letter is gone, and nothing you do will change that." Poirot stepped closer, his voice soft. "You are wrong, madame. Someone feared what that letter contained so much they risked discovery tonight to destroy it. That is not peace. It is panic. And panic always leaves its trace." Clara Dane spoke suddenly, her voice breaking through the tension. "Then look at me. I didn't burn it, but I saw who did." All eyes turned to her. Poirot's expression softened. "Go on, mademoiselle." "It was Sir Charles," she said, trembling. "I saw him through the window of the chapel. He had a lantern and he was burning papers. I thought it was something of his own. I didn't realize." Sir Charles surged to his feet. "Lies! That girl will say anything to save herself." Poirot's hand lifted calmly. "Sit, monsieur. Anger is the last refuge of the guilty or the frightened." The man hesitated, then sank back into his chair, sweating. "You have no proof." "No," Poirot said softly, "not proof. Yet. But you have made a small mistake, Sir Charles. The shoes you wear tonight, the soles are still damp and streaked with candle wax. Very few men walk through a chapel in the rain with candle wax upon their boots." A stunned silence followed. Poirot sighed gently. "The evidence vanishes, yes, but not completely. There is always something left. A scent, a stain, a whisper." Lady Eleanor stood motionless, her expression unreadable. Clara began to cry quietly. Sir Charles looked trapped, cornered, but still defiant. Poirot turned toward Hastings, his tone low. "We are close now, but you see, mon ami, someone else guided his hand. He's no mastermind. The destruction of the letter was desperate, not clever. The true puppeteer still waits behind the curtain." He faced them all again, his voice calm and precise. "Tonight, I shall not accuse. But tomorrow, before the dawn, Oxford Hall will be stripped of its shadows, and those who have buried the past will find it returning, one final time to claim its due." Outside, thunder rolled distantly. Somewhere in the house a door closed softly, too softly. Poirot looked toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. "You hear, Hastings?" he murmured. "Someone listens still. The game is not yet finished." The night deepened into something heavier than darkness, the kind of silence that presses against the walls and listens. A storm gathered far off over the moors, flickering faint lightning through the fog that still clung stubbornly to the lawns of Oxford Hall. In the drawing-room, the atmosphere remained brittle. No one had spoken since Poirot's last words. Sir Charles sat slumped in his chair, staring into the carpet, his face beaded with sweat. Lady Eleanor stood at the window, her back rigid, one pale hand gripping the curtain as though anchoring herself to something solid. Clara Dane, exhausted from tears, sat near the hearth, trembling in the flicker of the dying fire. Poirot, composed as ever, broke the silence at last. "It is late," he said quietly. "The truth does not reveal herself to tired minds. Each of you will retire for the night, and tomorrow we shall finish this unpleasant affair. I ask only that no one leave the house." Lady Eleanor turned sharply. "You still play your game, Monsieur Poirot, even now?" He bowed slightly. "Always, madame. It is the only game I know." As the guests dispersed, Poirot remained seated by the fire, his small eyes watchful beneath half-lowered lids. Hastings lingered beside him, uneasy. "You don't trust any of them, do you?" he murmured. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Trust, mon ami, is a luxury in short supply. Someone in this house has killed once, and tonight I fear they may attempt it again." A roll of thunder answered him, distant but deliberate. By midnight, the manor was silent again. Poirot made his rounds, softly, without light, listening. The great corridors of Oxford Hall stretched into blackness. Doors stood closed, the air faintly perfumed with smoke and rain. When he reached the end of the west wing, he paused. The window at the landing was open, curtains fluttering like pale ghosts. He leaned closer, mud on the sill. Fresh mud. "Ah," he whispered. "So the night moves again." He turned back toward the main corridor, but before he reached the stairs, a sound cut through the stillness. A scream, sharp, female, and near the servants' quarters. Poirot ran, surprisingly fast for his small frame, his slippers slapping softly on the marble. Hastings, roused by the noise, appeared at the far end of the hall, lamp in hand. Together they burst through the narrow door leading to the servants' passage. Clara Dane was standing in the middle of the corridor, white as death, her hands smeared with something dark. For a moment she could only point toward the stairwell, her breath coming in sobs. Poirot's gaze followed and froze. At the bottom of the steps lay Sir Charles Avery, twisted grotesquely, eyes open, a broken glass clenched in one hand. A dark stain spread slowly beneath him, glistening red in the lamplight. Hastings recoiled. "Good Lord, he's dead." Poirot knelt beside the body, his expression grave but calm. "Yes, Hastings, and not by accident. See here." He pointed to a small wound on the back of the man's neck, deep and precise. The fall did not kill him. This did. A blade, perhaps slender, perhaps surgical. "A knife?" Hastings breathed. "Oui, but not one from the dining room. One that cuts quickly and cleanly." He rose, his eyes narrowing. "It is the work of someone who has killed before, or someone who feared what Sir Charles might reveal." Clara swayed on her feet, pressing a hand to her mouth. "I heard him leaving his room," she whispered. "I thought he was going to the library. Then I heard a crash, and when I came, he was already." Poirot guided her gently to a chair. "Courage, mademoiselle. You have done well. Tell me, did you see anyone else?" She shook her head, tears spilling freely. "No one. But—" her voice broke. "There was a smell, like smoke, and something sweet. Perfume." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Perfume, you say?" Lady Eleanor appeared at the far end of the corridor then, wrapped in a dark robe, her expression one of icy composure. "What is this noise? What has happened?" When she saw the body, her face drained of colour. "Dear God," she whispered. "Not again." Poirot turned toward her. "Madame, it seems tragedy has returned to Oxford Hall. Sir Charles is dead." She stared at the scene, then met Poirot's gaze with something like weary defiance. "And you think I had a hand in this as well?" "I think, madame," Poirot said softly, "that Sir Charles's death benefits someone greatly, and that someone wears your perfume." Her breath caught. "My perfume?" He nodded slightly. "It is the same fragrance that lingered in the chapel last night when the letter burned. The scent of jasmine and amber. Very distinctive." Her hand trembled as she clutched her robe. "Anyone could have it. It's no proof." "Ah," said Poirot, "but the bottle in your dressing table is nearly empty, n'est-ce pas? One wonders why." Before she could answer, Jameson the inspector came running in with 2 constables, his face pale and drawn. "I heard the shot. What? My God!" He stopped short at the sight of the body. "Poirot, this is madness. The doctor's in custody, and now another man's dead. Who's left to suspect?" "Everyone, Inspector," Poirot replied calmly. "Everyone still breathing." The body was carried to the library for examination. As the servants whispered and the storm lashed the windows, Poirot stood apart, staring at the dead man's hand. The glass it held was cracked, but faint residue clung to its rim, a whitish powder, crystalline under the light. "Poison," he murmured. "But why the wound as well? 2 deaths in one body? No, this was staged. The wound conceals the poison, or the poison conceals the wound." Hastings leaned close. "What do you mean?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That Sir Charles did not die where he fell. He was carried here, or pushed after he was already dead, and whoever killed him wishes us to believe it was swift and chaotic. Yet chaos, Hastings, is merely the mask of calculation." He turned suddenly. "Inspector, I beg of you, see that no one leaves their rooms until dawn. The killer walks still among us." Jameson hesitated. "You think there'll be another?" Poirot's gaze drifted toward the tall windows, where lightning illuminated the shadowed corridor beyond. When a man kills to bury the truth, one body is never enough. It was nearly 3 o'clock when the hall settled again into uneasy silence. Poirot, restless, paced the library. He stopped only once, to lift the ivory chess piece still resting on the desk. He turned it over in his palm, thoughtful. "The night," he murmured, "moves in crooked lines, so too does the killer." He set it down and moved toward the window, and froze. For there, on the outside sill, pressed faintly into the condensation of rain, was the print of a gloved hand. Small, delicate, feminine. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered. "She's not done yet." Even as he spoke, a muffled sound echoed from the floor above, a door creaking, a quick footstep, then the unmistakable crash of glass. Hastings came running, alarmed, as Poirot turned toward the staircase, his expression grim. "The Queen moves at last," he said quietly. "And if we are too slow, Hastings, someone else will not see the morning." They ascended into darkness, the lamps flickering. Behind them, somewhere above, in the depths of the sleeping house, a final secret was stirring, alive and merciless. The crash from upstairs was sharp enough to shatter the fragile quiet that had settled over Oxford Hall. Poirot was already halfway up the staircase before Hastings could call after him, his small figure surprisingly swift, his shadow stretching long and distorted in the flickering light from the storm outside. The corridor above was dark save for the dim glow of a single lamp left burning near the end. Somewhere beyond it, a door swayed slightly, its hinges whispering in the wind from an open window. When Poirot reached the landing, he paused, his keen eyes sweeping the space. "Do you smell it, Hastings?" he whispered. "That faint scent of jasmine again. It clings like guilt." They advanced carefully, and as they neared the last door, the one to Lady Eleanor's chambers, they saw the shattered glass glittering on the floor. The window had been forced open from within. Curtains fluttered like pale ghosts. The room itself was empty. Only a faint indentation remained on the bedspread, as though someone had sat there moments earlier. "She's gone," Hastings said. Poirot nodded slowly. "Oui, and she left in haste. Look, her dressing gown lies half-folded, but her gloves are missing. And here," he bent, lifting something from the carpet, a small ivory button cracked down the middle. "From a glove, mon ami. It seems Our Lady is shedding clues as though she wishes to be followed." They moved toward the window. Outside, the storm had worsened, the rain sweeping across the terrace in silver sheets. "It's madness to go out in that," Hastings muttered. "Madness," Poirot replied softly. "Or desperation. When the Queen is cornered, she sacrifices herself to save the King. But who, I wonder, is the King in this game?" They descended again, summoning Jameson and the constables who scoured the grounds. Yet by dawn Lady Eleanor was nowhere to be found. Her footprints vanished at the edge of the garden path, swallowed by mud and rain. When morning came, the house awoke to whispers. 2 deaths now hung over Oxford Hall, and the storm had left everything damp and ghostly. Poirot sat once more in the library, a blanket over his knees, his eyes on the dying embers of the fire. Hastings hovered near him, restless. "You've hardly slept," Hastings said. "You'll make yourself ill." Poirot smiled faintly. "The mind, Hastings, does not sleep when it dances near the truth." He pointed toward the chess piece still resting on the desk. "You see, I have stared at that night all night, and at last I think it begins to speak." Hastings blinked. "The chess piece? But it's only a trinket." "Ah, non. That, my friend, Is what everyone thought, the police, the family, even I at first. But tell me, what is the rule of the night, Hastings? The rule? Hastings frowned. Well, it moves. Oddly, doesn't it? 2 steps one way, one another. It jumps over others. Poirot nodded slowly. It leaps, yes. It is the only piece that does. Always indirect, always avoiding obstacles. The perfect symbol for our murderer. Hastings gave him a puzzled look. You mean it's a message? A reflection, Poirot said softly. A mirror of the mind that planned all this. The killer moves obliquely, never straight, always appearing where least expected. First, the master of the house. Then, the man who profited by his death. And now, perhaps the woman who knew too much. 3 moves, each one clearing the board. He leaned forward suddenly, his eyes alight. But what does the night protect, mon ami? It defends the king. That is what I have missed all along. Before Hastings could respond, Jameson entered, his face drawn. Poirot, there's news. We've found Lady Eleanor. Poirot rose at once. Alive? Barely, the inspector said grimly. In the chapel. She must have gone there after the storm broke. The doctor says she's feverish, half-conscious, keeps murmuring something about a key. Poirot's gaze sharpened. A key? To what? Jameson shook his head. We don't know, but she was clutching this. He handed Poirot a damp scrap of paper, its ink smudged almost beyond recognition. Only a few words were legible. The drawer beneath the portrait. Forgiveness. Too late. Poirot's expression grew distant. Beneath the portrait. He turned toward the far wall where the grand oil painting of Lord Winstanley hung, his stern eyes forever watching the room. Poirot crossed to it and examined the frame. Hastings, help me lift this. Together they eased the heavy portrait from its hooks, revealing a small recess in the wall, a narrow drawer, locked. Poirot slipped a thin instrument from his pocket and with careful pressure sprung the catch. Inside lay a sealed envelope, its wax broken, the contents missing. But beside it lay another object, a single cufflink, gold, engraved with the initials L.H. L.H., Hastings said. Leonard Hale, the secretary. Poirot's voice dropped. The one who vanished conveniently after the first death. Jameson frowned. We questioned him. He was released. No evidence against him. Non, Poirot murmured. No evidence then. But now it begins to fit. Leonard Hale, once the loyal secretary, the dismissed servant, the man forgotten in the background, the knight, Hastings, who moved where others could not. He held up the cufflink to the light. See the tarnish along the edge? Salt corrosion from the sea. I recall that Mr. Hale once claimed he was leaving for France the night after the murder, but there was a storm that closed the ports. He never left England. He has been here, near Oxford Hall, all along. Jameson's eyes widened. You think he's behind all this? Poirot smiled faintly. I think, my dear, Inspector, that he has been directing this entire performance from the wings. Lady Eleanor feared him, Sir Charles suspected him, and Lord Winstanley. He discovered him too late. The letter in blue wax, the wax that matched the orphanage's seal where Hale once worked as Montford's clerk. The past again, returning. He moved to the window, the pale morning light outlining his small figure. Do you remember, Hastings, what the maid said she heard that night? A single word before the gunshot. Enough! Not despair, but command. Lord Winstanley was not alone when he died. He was being silenced. And now Lady Eleanor, Hastings asked softly, because she remembered something she was never meant to recall. The drawer, the key, the letter. It all pointed to him. Poirot turned back, his expression grave. But he is clever, this Leonard Hale. Too clever. He has erased his traces with precision. Yet... He paused suddenly, his gaze falling once more to the desk, to the half-finished glass of port left there since the previous night. A faint ring stained the wood beneath it. Beside it lay another glass, empty, but faintly marked with a smear of salt across the rim. Salt, Poirot whispered. From sea air, or from tears. Mon Dieu, how blind I have been. He turned sharply to Jameson. Inspector, send men to the boathouse at once, the one on the lower grounds near the lake. If I am not mistaken, our missing knight hides there still, and his next move will not be retreat. The inspector hurried off. Poirot remained by the window, watching the first clear light of morning break through the mist. Hastings looked at him. bewildered, yet hopeful. "You really think you've solved it?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Not solved, mon ami. Revealed. The pattern at last is visible. Every move, every death, each one played to protect something very small, yet infinitely dangerous. And before the day ends, we shall see the hand that moved the night." Outside, the rain had stopped. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and smoke. Somewhere, beyond the still grey water of the lake, the faint echo of a door closing carried through the mist, a quiet, final move in a game that was nearly done. The rain had slowed to a mist when Poirot and Hastings approached the boathouse. It sat at the far edge of the property, half shrouded by reeds and the low morning fog that crawled along the lake's surface. The wooden planks creaked under their feet as they drew nearer, each step echoing with the quiet finality of inevitability. Inside, a faint light flickered. Poirot motioned for Hastings to keep back. "Patience, mon ami," he whispered. "When the truth lies so close, one must walk softly, lest it hides again." Through the crack in the door they saw a man seated at a table, a man thin and pale, his suit dishevelled, his hands trembling as he packed papers into a worn leather satchel. The lantern beside him cast deep shadows over his face, but there was no mistaking him. "Leonard Hale," Poirot murmured. The man looked older than his years, the sharp features worn by sleeplessness and guilt. He paused suddenly, his hand gripping something small, metallic, before sliding it into his coat pocket. Poirot stepped inside. "That would be quite unnecessary, monsieur. You will find the revolver adds nothing to your argument." Hale stiffened, then turned slowly. His expression caught somewhere between resignation and relief. "So it's you," he said quietly. "I wondered how long it would take." Poirot inclined his head. "Not long enough, perhaps. Another hour and you would have vanished across the lake, yes. To France, as before." The man gave a thin, bitter smile. "You've been clever, Monsieur Poirot. I almost admire you. But it doesn't matter now. You can't change what's done." "No," said Poirot softly. "But I can understand it. And you, monsieur, are not a man who kills without reason. It was not greed, not power, something else. Something that lies deep within the heart, like rot beneath a floorboard." Hale sank slowly into the chair, his hands clasped before him. The lantern's light trembled over his face, revealing eyes that were wet but not with fear. "You think you know me," he said, "but you don't. You think this was about money, the inheritance, the will, the scandal. It wasn't. It was about silence, about the things people bury so deep they begin to think they never happened." Poirot studied him quietly. "Ah, so it was not hatred of Lord Winstanley that drove you, but loyalty to someone else. Perhaps the child he wronged?" Hale's head lifted sharply, his composure breaking. "He ruined her," he said hoarsely. "Eliza Hale, my sister. You've read the records. You know what he did. He took her in, promised her a better life, then cast her aside like rubbish when she bore his child. The fire that killed her, it wasn't an accident. She set it herself. And she left that baby behind." His voice cracked, the years of bitterness rising in a single trembling breath. "That baby was Clara Dane," Hastings gasped softly. Poirot remained perfectly still, his eyes narrowing slightly. "So you came back for vengeance?" Hale gave a weary nod. "At first, yes, but vengeance fades. It becomes something else. I watched her, Clara, grow up in that house, unaware that the man she called benefactor was her father. When she found out, she wanted to tell the world. She was angry, heartbroken, and I told her I would help her, but she didn't understand. The truth destroys more than lies ever can." He rubbed his hands together, trembling. "I tried to reason with him that night. I begged him to confess quietly, to make provision for her, for what was right. But he laughed. He said he owed her nothing, that she should be grateful for the crumbs he'd given. And then he tore up the letter of acknowledgement before my eyes." Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "So you shot him?" Hale's eyes closed. "I only meant to frighten him. The gun went off too easily. I didn't even realize he was dead until the ink from his pen bled across the desk. I panicked. I staged it as suicide. I thought it would end there. But Lady Eleanor saw. She came into the room moments after I left." "The letter," Poirot murmured. "She found it." "Yes, she read it. She understood everything. But she wasn't horrified. She was furious. She said Clara would never have what belonged to her. She destroyed the letter and swore to keep the truth buried. She said if I didn't leave, she'd expose me as a murderer. So I left. But when I heard she planned to sell the estate and cast Clara out, I came back. I tried to stop her. And Sir Charles? Poirot asked quietly. He found me near the chapel that night, Hale said. He recognised me. Said he'd keep my secret for a price. He was no better than the rest of them. He'd helped forge the papers transferring the estate. He thought he could squeeze money from me. When he followed me last night, I warned him away. He struck first. I only meant to defend myself, but he fell, and... Hale's voice trailed off. For a long moment there was only the sound of the rain tapping gently against the roof. Poirot's face softened, the sharpness of deduction giving way to something almost sorrowful. So you see, Hale whispered, it wasn't about the money, it was about silence. Every one of them lived off that silence, fed by it. My sister died for it. And Clara, if she ever learned the truth, it would destroy her too. I killed to protect her from that. I would do it again. Poirot sighed, removing his hat. You mistake mercy for justice, monsieur. The truth is cruel, yes, but silence, it seems, is crueler still. He stepped closer, his voice low and firm. You tried to play at vengeance like a game of chess, moving your pieces carefully, always one step aside. But you forgot in the end that a game must end with honesty. No one wins by deceit. Hale laughed softly, a hollow sound. You speak of honesty, Poirot, but you've never lost someone you loved because of another man's cruelty. Poirot's eyes darkened. Ah, but I have, mon ami, and that is why I know. To kill for love is to murder twice, once the body, once the soul. Outside, footsteps approached. Inspector Jameson entered, flanked by 2 constables. Poirot gave a small nod, and Hale rose without protest. His eyes found Poirot's once more. You'll tell her? He asked quietly. You'll tell Clara it was quick, that her father didn't suffer. Poirot hesitated. Non, I will tell her that he died seeking forgiveness. It is a lie she can live with. Hale's expression softened, a flicker of gratitude passing through the weariness. You're kinder than I thought. When he was led away, Poirot remained standing by the lake, the mist swirling around him. The first light of morning glinted across the water, where reeds whispered in the wind. Hastings came to his side, silent for a while before speaking. So that's it then, he said. All for the sins of a man long dead? Poirot's voice was distant. Non, Hastings, for the sins of pride. Lord Winstanley believed himself untouchable, and those who lived beneath his shadow learned deceit as survival. Lady Eleanor with her denial, Sir Charles with his greed, Hale with his vengeance. They are all children of the same lie. He glanced toward the house. And the girl, she too must now live in the ruins of their silence. Hastings sighed. You won't tell her the full truth? Poirot looked out at the lake, his reflection wavering upon the rippling water. No, mon ami, truth is a fine thing, but mercy, mercy is sometimes finer. The wind rose again, carrying the faint echo of the chapel bell across the water. The case was closed, yet Oxford Hall felt emptier than before, as though every secret had drained the house of breath. Poirot turned toward the path, his voice barely above a whisper. The night has fallen, he said, but the board will never be clean. The morning light filtered weakly through the clouds, painting the lawns of Oxford Hall in muted silver. The mist had begun to lift, though it clung stubbornly to the lake and to the low reeds surrounding the boathouse, where the final act had played out only hours before. Inside the manor, silence reigned. The servants moved like ghosts, speaking in hushed tones as though afraid of disturbing the fragile calm that had settled after so many nights of terror. Poirot sat alone in the library, immaculate as ever, though his eyes were shadowed with weariness. The clock ticked softly above the hearth. He waited, patient, poised, as though he had been there for hours. Perhaps he had. Hastings entered quietly, setting a cup of tea beside him. She's awake, Hastings said. Clara, I mean. The doctor says she's still weak, but she keeps asking for you. Poirot nodded. Good. It is time she knows the truth that remains, the truth she can bear. Hastings hesitated. You're not going to tell her everything. Non, mon ami, Poirot murmured. Not everything. A garden must not be watered with salt. He rose then, smoothing his waistcoat, his eyes calm but alert. Before I see her, however, there is one last matter to attend. The final move of the game must be played, and I fear our player has not yet resigned. Hastings frowned. You mean Hale? But he's under guard. Ah, yes, said Poirot softly. Guarded, but not secure. There is still something in him that refuses surrender. A desperate man, Hastings, is the most dangerous of all. He knows the walls are closing, yet he believes, how do you say, that one last stroke of genius may yet save him. A knock came at the door. Inspector Jameson entered, hat in hand, his face grim. You were right, Poirot. Hale escaped less than an hour ago. Mon Dieu, Hastings breathed. But how? He bribed one of the constables with his watch, slipped out during the exchange. Jameson's jaw tightened. We've sent men to the station and the surrounding roads. But if he's hiding on the grounds... Poirot lifted a hand. He will not run far. His purpose here is unfinished. The mind that kills for silence cannot bear to leave echoes behind. As if on cue, the faint echo of footsteps sounded from the corridor, soft, deliberate. Poirot turned, eyes narrowing. He is here, he said simply. The door opened slowly and Leonard Hale stepped inside. He looked gaunt, the pallor of exhaustion giving him the aspect of a man half alive. In his hand he held the revolver Poirot had seen before, its dull barrel glinting faintly in the morning light. Jameson reached instinctively for his weapon, but Poirot raised a hand. No, Inspector, let him speak. Hale closed the door behind him, his gaze fixed on Poirot. I should have known you'd be waiting, he said softly. You always are. Poirot inclined his head. It is my nature, monsieur. I tidy the board when others leave it in disarray. Hale gave a hollow laugh. You think this is tidy? A house full of liars, a girl who's lost her entire past, and me, about to finish what should have ended years ago. He raised the gun slightly, not at Poirot, but toward the door. Where is she, Clara? You've told her, haven't you? Non, said Poirot quietly. Not as you imagine. She knows only that her father sought to make amends before his death, and that a man who loved her mother took it upon himself to see justice done. Hale's expression faltered. The hand holding the gun trembled. You think that's mercy? He asked bitterly. You think she'll live in peace believing a lie? Poirot stepped closer, calm, steady. I think she deserves a life not poisoned by the sins of others. You avenged your sister, yes, but vengeance is a poor guardian. It keeps one awake when the rest of the world sleeps. Hale's breathing quickened. You don't understand. I did this for her, for Clara. To give her what was stolen from us. To free her from their cruelty. By killing... Poirot's voice was soft, but the words struck like flint. You freed no one. You have chained her to your guilt, and she will carry it all her life unless you... A sound behind them cut him short. The faint creak of a door. Clara stood in the threshold, pale, still fragile, but upright. The colour drained from Hale's face as their eyes met. Clara, he whispered, you shouldn't be here. She took a hesitant step forward. I had to be. I heard voices. I wanted to understand. Her eyes flicked to Poirot. You said there were things I should hear from you, not from anyone else. Poirot's expression softened, but his gaze never left Hale. Then hear them now, mademoiselle. The man before you loved your mother, more than you can know. He tried to protect her memory and you, though in the wrong way. The rest is best left to God. Clara looked between them, confusion and dread twisting in her face. What are you saying? That he... Hale lowered the gun slowly. It's true, he said quietly. I killed him, Clara, your father. He deserved it, but that doesn't matter now. The silence that followed was unbearable. The rain tapped faintly against the window, as though even the storm dared not interrupt. Clara's lips trembled. You killed him to protect me. I killed him because I couldn't bear to see you live under his lies, Hale said. I thought if I took that sin upon myself, you'd be free. She shook her head, tears bright in her eyes. You've destroyed me instead. Poirot stepped forward, his voice firm yet gentle. Enough, mademoiselle. There are words that should not be spoken in anger, not when the truth has already bled enough. He looked to Hale. Put the gun down, monsieur. End this madness before it claims another life. For a moment Hale's gaze wavered between them. The girl he'd tried to save and the man who had unmasked him. His breath came shallow, his knuckles white around the weapon. Then, with a shuddering exhale, he let it fall to the carpet. "I thought I could finish it," he whispered. "But I see now, it never ends, does it?" "No," Poirot said softly. "Not with bullets. Only with confession." Jameson moved forward, handcuffs ready, but Hale turned to Clara instead. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for everything, for not being strong enough to forgive." She said nothing, only turned away, her shoulders shaking. Poirot's gaze lingered on her a moment before he nodded to Jameson. "Take him gently, Inspector. He is guilty, yes, but also broken." As Hale was led from the room, the storm began to clear. Sunlight pierced the clouds spilling through the tall windows of the library, gilding the dust that floated in the air. Poirot stood still, hands clasped behind his back, his eyes on the fading ripples in the lake beyond the glass. Hastings approached quietly. "You've done it, Poirot. It's over." Poirot did not answer at once. He looked down at the chess piece still lying upon the desk, the ivory knight, cold and gleaming. With one finger he turned it over, revealing the faint blue stain that remained from the sealing wax. "Over?" he said softly. "No, mon ami, such things never end. The truth, once unearthed, has a way of haunting even those who sought it in good faith. There are no winners in such a game, only survivors." He placed the knight gently on the mantelpiece, its shadow stretching long in the morning light. "But still," he murmured, "it is finished enough." Outside, the bells of the chapel began to toll, slow and mournful. Poirot closed his eyes briefly, listening, then turned to Hastings with a weary smile. "Come, my friend," he said quietly. "Let us leave this place. The ghosts of Oxford Hall are too many for even my little grey cells." And as they walked away down the long corridor, the house behind them seemed to exhale, as though, at last, it had been waiting for this, its final confession. They left Oxford Hall that afternoon beneath a pale, uncertain sky. The rain had stopped, but the ground was slick with memory, the kind that clung to one's shoes and refused to let go. Poirot and Hastings walked in silence down the gravel drive, their steps slow, deliberate, as though even the air was reluctant to part with them. Behind them, the manor loomed, a great and brooding monument to deceit, its windows glinting like half-closed eyes. Hastings spoke first. "It feels unfinished," he said softly. "Even after all that. I can't explain it, Poirot, but something still doesn't sit right." Poirot smiled faintly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Your instincts, mon ami, are better than you think. The case is unfinished, though not in the way you imagine. There is always one detail left behind. The murderer may confess, but the truth... Ah, the truth. She is like the mist. She lingers." They reached the car waiting by the gate. Hastings paused to light a cigarette, his thoughts still heavy. "At least Hale's in custody now," he murmured. "He'll face trial, and Clara can try to rebuild her life." Poirot's eyes lifted to the horizon, where the faint glimmer of the lake shimmered beneath the thinning clouds. "Yes," he said quietly. "Unless, of course, the wrong man sits in the cell." Hastings turned sharply. "The wrong man? But Poirot, surely not. You saw his confession yourself." Poirot's gaze lingered on the manor, its reflection faintly distorted in the wet gravel. "Oui, I heard his confession. But I have heard confessions before, my friend, some born of guilt, some born of love, and some born of convenience. A man who has lost everything may confess to anything if it gives meaning to his ruin." Hastings frowned, confused. "You think Hale's lying? But why would he take the blame?" Poirot opened the car door but did not step inside. "Because, Hastings, sometimes the heart invents its own logic. It is capable of great foolishness, and of even greater sacrifice." He looked toward the upper windows of the manor, where a faint movement caught his eye. A curtain shifted, just slightly. Then, nothing. "Come," he said softly. "We must pay one more visit before we leave." Hastings groaned. "Back to the house?" Poirot smiled. "To the truth, mon ami. She waits there still, impatient." They returned through the grand doors, where the hall lay quiet but not at peace. The fire in the library had been rekindled, though no one claimed to have done it. Poirot walked straight to the mantel, to the small ivory knight that still stood in its usual place. He lifted it delicately, turning it in his fingers as though reading its face. "Strange," he murmured. "The piece is lighter than before. You notice it, Hastings?" "I can't say I do," Hastings admitted. Poirot tapped it against the edge of the desk. A hollow sound answered him. He smiled faintly. "Ah, hollow nights, hollow men." Then, very carefully, he twisted the base. It turned with a faint click. From inside slid a narrow strip of paper, rolled tight as a secret. Hastings leaned closer. "What on earth?" Poirot unrolled the paper, smoothing it on the desk. Faded ink. A woman's handwriting. "The child must never know. Forgive me. E." Hastings stared. "Eleanor. But she destroyed the letter." "Non, mon ami," Poirot said softly. "She destroyed the wrong one." He looked up, eyes bright. This was the true confession, the one Lord Winstanley wrote before his death. But it was she, Lady Eleanor, who hid it here. Not to protect herself, as we thought, but to protect Clara. It proves she knew everything, and that she lied to Hale. Hastings frowned. "But she's gone. Surely that changes nothing now." Poirot shook his head. "Ah, but it changes everything. Because you see, this letter, this handwriting, is not Lady Eleanor's. It is forged." He laid the paper beside a note written earlier by Clara Dane. The resemblance was striking. "Clara?" Hastings whispered, disbelieving. "You mean she wrote it?" Poirot nodded slowly. "She did. To mislead. To conceal something far more dangerous. Hale believed she knew nothing, that he was saving her from ruin. But Clara Dane is not the innocent child she pretended to be. She played the part perfectly, the trembling victim, the orphaned girl, but she is her father's daughter in every sense." Hastings looked pale. But what could she possibly gain? Poirot walked toward the window, his voice low and deliberate. Everything. The estate, the sympathy, the freedom from every tie. When she learned the truth, that she was Winstanley's illegitimate daughter, she did not weep. She planned. She saw in his guilt an opportunity. The letter her father wrote was one of repentance. He meant to acknowledge her publicly, to amend his will. That would have ruined Lady Eleanor and Sir Charles, yes, but it would also have tied Clara to her shame forever. A bastard heiress, a scandal whispered at every dinner table, so she made certain that letter never reached anyone. Hastings shook his head. "But Hale killed him. He said so himself." "Oui," said Poirot softly. He believed he did. The shot was fired, yes, but the bullet was not his. His gun had been tampered with, a blank cartridge, replaced by someone who knew he would confront Lord Winstanley that night. When the real shot came, from the shadows, it was not fired by the man in front of the desk, but from the doorway behind, the work of a patient hand, one waiting for the right moment. The colour drained from Hastings' face. Clara. Poirot turned, his voice quiet but certain. "She used them all, Hastings. Hale's love, Lady Eleanor's jealousy, Sir Charles's greed. One by one she let them tear each other apart until she alone stood untouched. When the inspector arrested Hale, she did not protest because she knew he would protect her to the end. And now she inherits the estate, with sympathy from all England for her tragic misfortune." As if summoned by the words, the library door creaked open. Clara stood there, wrapped in a dark cloak, her eyes dry and unreadable. "I thought you'd gone," she said evenly. Poirot smiled gently. "Ah, mademoiselle, you must forgive me. I dislike unfinished puzzles." She stepped inside, her gaze flicking to the desk, to the open chess piece. "So you found it?" "Yes," Poirot said softly. "The final move." For a moment neither spoke. Then she laughed quietly, bitterly. "You think I'm wicked, don't you? Like him, like them. But I only played the game they taught me. They lied, cheated, destroyed lives. And you pity them?" "I do not pity," Poirot replied. "I understand. But understanding does not absolve." She smiled faintly. "And what will you do? Tell them I killed him? That I outplayed you all? They'll never believe it. The orphan girl, the lost daughter. No one will doubt my innocence now. They'll hang your poor Hale instead." Poirot's expression did not change. "Non, mademoiselle, they will not. You see, I left a note with Inspector Jameson before I came here. The hollow night, he was already in the inspector's hands. I only wished to see if you would come for him, and here you are." Clara's composure cracked, her eyes flashing. "You set a trap." "Oui," said Poirot softly. "The night moves one last time." For a heartbeat the air stood still. Then she turned sharply, her cloak sweeping as she darted for the door. Hastings moved first, blocking her path. She stopped, trembling, not with fear but fury. "You don't understand," she hissed. "He deserved to die. They all did." Poirot looked at her sadly. "Perhaps, but justice, mademoiselle, is not ours to rewrite." When the police led her away moments later, the house seemed to sigh again. Another secret exhaled, another silence broken. Poirot watched through the rain-slick window as she was driven off, her face unreadable behind the glass. Hastings stood beside him, still shaken. "I'd never have guessed it," he murmured. "She fooled everyone." Poirot smiled faintly. "Even me, for a moment." "But then, Hastings, even the finest illusions crumble when touched by truth." He turned to the desk, placing the ivory knight back upon it. "You see, my friend, in the end it was not vengeance nor love that drove her, but inheritance of the soul. She killed not to gain fortune, but to prove she could control her fate. A new generation repeating the sins of the last." Hastings exhaled slowly. "And you, Poirot, what will you do now?" Poirot looked once more at the chess piece, the shadow of his reflection crossing it. "What I always do, mon ami. I shall move to the next game, though I pray the board is cleaner than this one." Outside, the wind carried away the last of the mist. The storm was over, but its echo lingered, in the halls, in the walls, and in the faint glint of ivory upon the desk, where the knight stood motionless, guarding its secret still. The car carrying Clara disappeared down the long drive, leaving behind the hollow quiet of Oxford Hall. Poirot and Hastings stood on the steps as the sound of its engine faded into the distance, replaced by the rustle of wind through the dripping ivy. The storm had passed, but the air still held that uneasy heaviness, like a house that had exhaled too late. Hastings drew a long breath. "It's strange," he said softly. "After everything, I can't decide whether justice was done or not. It feels as though the whole business was too simple in the end." Poirot's eyes did not leave the road. "Ah, mon ami, that is because justice, like truth, is never simple. It changes shape depending on who looks at it. To Hale, it was vengeance. To Clara, it was freedom. To Lady Eleanor, silence. Each saw it as a weapon, not as a mirror." He turned then, his voice lower. "But there is one final thing that does not rest easy with me. A detail, small but stubborn, that refuses to lie still." Hastings frowned. "A detail? Surely not, Poirot. What could be left?" Poirot smiled faintly. "The truth, Hastings, is like a candle in the wind. It may flicker, but until it burns itself out, there is always a shadow that dances beside it." They stepped back inside. The house seemed emptier now. The echo of their steps was swallowed by the old wood and silence. In the library, the ivory knight still stood where Poirot had placed it, catching the afternoon light like a pale ghost. Poirot walked toward it slowly, almost reverently, and reached to adjust it once more. "The piece intrigues me," he murmured. "Always it stood upon the desk, even through the fire, the searches, the chaos, and yet no one ever asked who brought it there." Hastings frowned. "I assumed it was Lord Winstanley's." That is what we all assumed," Poirot said. "But when I examined the base earlier, I found traces of something most curious. Powdered wax, not blue, but red. Red sealing wax, Hastings. The kind used on the letter Hale burned." Hastings blinked. "You mean the knight was used to press the seal?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Indeed. The impression on the melted wax was not the family crest at all. It was the curved edge of this very figure. A desperate improvisation. Someone sealed that letter not with a proper stamp, but with the back of this piece." Hastings stared. "But why would anyone do that?" Poirot smiled sadly. "Because they had no crest of their own." He looked toward the window where the last light filtered through. "You see, Hastings, I wondered why Clara was so calm when I accused her. Too calm. She had prepared for that possibility. But what she did not anticipate was that I would notice the red wax. It told me that the letter we thought was written by Lord Winstanley's hand was in truth written after his death." Hastings' eyes widened. "After? But who?" "Clara, oui," Poirot said. "But not alone. There was someone else in the room that night. Someone who helped her forge the letter. Someone who had the knowledge to recreate the handwriting. And, most importantly, someone who stood to gain if the blame fell neatly away from the family's name." He paused, letting the silence build. Lady Eleanor. Hastings turned pale. But she's dead. Dead? Poirot repeated softly. You recall, Hastings, that her body was found in the chapel after the storm. Pale, cold, the doctor claiming fever. But did you notice the smell? No fever smells of almonds. It was poison. Self-administered, they said. I say it was penance. Hastings looked at him, stunned. Poirot continued, his tone gentle but precise. Lady Eleanor discovered Clara's secret before Hale returned. She knew her husband's sin, and in her twisted way she loved the girl too much to expose her. When the death occurred, she helped Clara conceal it, thinking she could keep the scandal buried. But as the years wore on, guilt is a poor companion. The night Hale returned, Eleanor saw the past closing in. She realized Clara was capable of the same cruelty as her father. And so, at last, she confessed, half to Hale, half to God, by leaving behind the letter that we found sealed in red wax, not to accuse, but to absolve. Only Clara misused it. He walked slowly to the fire, gazing into the low flames. The girl forged the rest, using Eleanor's hand as a guide. She made herself the victim once more, and Hale, poor fool, became her final shield. Hastings was silent for a long moment. Then she wasn't the only one guilty. No, Poirot said quietly, but she was the only one who lived to wear the mask. Lady Eleanor's sin was silence. Clara's was perfection. She learned deceit from every soul in that house, and by the time I arrived, she had made it an art. The wind stirred through the chimney, a faint, mournful sound. Poirot placed the knight gently upon the mantel and turned toward Hastings. When she left today, did you notice her gloves? Hastings blinked. Her gloves? No. Why? One button was missing, Poirot said softly. The same ivory button we found in her mother's room the night she disappeared. She wore it again, Hastings, as if daring me to see. A small cruelty. A reminder that she had won something after all. Hastings exhaled. You mean she got away with it? Poirot looked out the window again, his expression unreadable. In the eyes of the law, perhaps, but in the theatre of the soul no one escapes. She will live with ghosts that have no mercy. They stood in silence for a while, watching the last light fade over the lake. Then Poirot spoke again, softer now. You asked earlier if justice was served. I will tell you this. Justice is not a verdict, Hastings. It is a wound that closes too slowly. It leaves scars, not satisfaction. As they turned to leave, Poirot's gaze lingered one last time on the ivory knight. The firelight caught its edges, glinting faintly red where the sealing wax had stained it long ago. He smiled faintly, sadly. You see, mon ami, even the purest ivory remembers the blood that touched it. Hastings followed him into the corridor, their footsteps fading. The doors of Oxford Hall closed behind them with a sound like breath drawn in, and not released. Out on the gravel path the wind rose again, stirring the trees, and somewhere far off, a bell tolled once, deep and low. Poirot paused, tipping his hat toward the house. Goodbye, madame, he murmured. Your silence has spoken loudly enough. And as they drove away through the dusk, the manor sank into stillness once more, its windows empty, its secrets finally exhumed, but never entirely buried. The road stretched ahead in quiet stillness, bordered by leafless trees that swayed gently in the fading light. Poirot sat motionless beside Hastings, his small hands folded neatly upon his cane, his gaze fixed on the horizon as though he were watching the past dissolve into mist. The car hummed softly beneath them, its wheels whispering along the wet gravel. Hastings, glancing occasionally at his companion, could sense the detective's mind was not yet at rest. After a long silence, he said carefully, You're still thinking about it, aren't you? Poirot's eyes remained distant. Oui, mon ami. My thoughts. They are restless birds. They do not return to the cage until every feather is counted. Hastings gave a faint, uneasy smile. But surely everything is settled now. Clara's gone, Lady Eleanor dead, and Hale, well, the courts will decide his fate. What more could there be? Poirot tilted his head slightly, as though weighing the words against an invisible scale. There is always something more, Hastings, a final stitch in the tapestry, hidden but essential. Without it, the picture unravels. The car slowed as they approached the small railway station at Little Denforth. The platform was deserted save for a porter sweeping away the leaves that had blown in through the open doors. Poirot stepped out carefully, drawing his coat close against the cool air. He looked around, his gaze lingering briefly on the ticket window before turning toward the waiting bench. "Strange," he murmured. "Do you notice, Hastings, how the station smells faintly of jasmine?" Hastings blinked. "Jasmine? No, I can't say I do." Poirot's lips curved slightly. "Ah, but I do. It is the same perfume that haunted Oxford Hall, no? The same that lingered in the chapel. Curious that one should find it here, miles away." He walked slowly toward the telegraph office, his eyes sharp despite the weariness etched upon his face. The clerk behind the counter looked up nervously as Poirot approached. "Excuse me, monsieur," Poirot said gently. "Did a lady perhaps purchase a ticket here earlier today? One travelling alone, dark hair, pale complexion?" The clerk frowned, thinking. "Yes, sir. About an hour ago, maybe less. Took the afternoon train to Dover. Odd thing, that she paid in cash, didn't have any luggage. Left this behind, though." He reached under the counter and produced a small folded paper. Poirot accepted it, his fingers delicate, almost reverent. The note was creased and slightly damp. He opened it carefully. A single line was scrawled inside in an elegant hand. "You were right, Monsieur Poirot, but so was I." Hastings peered over his shoulder. "Good Lord, you don't mean Clara?" Poirot nodded slowly. "She is clever, Hastings. Too clever to vanish without leaving a signature." Hastings looked bewildered. But how could she possibly escape? She was under guard when we left the manor. Poirot's eyes glimmered with that familiar, unnerving calm. "Non, my friend. She was supposed to be under guard. But Inspector Jameson, he's a man of efficiency, not imagination. He would have sent her to the constable's station at Bexford, yes? The one with the side entrance opening onto the road. And who escorted her there? A young officer, Peters, was it not? The same man who served in the hall during the first investigation." He smiled faintly. "You see now? She did not flee her captors. She arranged her escape before she ever stepped into the car." Hastings ran a hand through his hair. "You mean she bribed him?" "Not bribed," Poirot said softly. "Persuaded. Mademoiselle Dane has the gift of making others believe what they wish to be true. To the guilty she offers absolution, to the lonely, affection, and to fools, admiration." He folded the note carefully, sliding it into his pocket. "I had hoped she would accept her fate, but perhaps it is fitting. The sins of her house are not so easily buried." They boarded the train as it whistled to life. Poirot chose a seat by the window, his reflection flickering against the glass as the countryside began to move past them in muted colours. Hastings sat across from him, restless. "You don't intend to chase her then?" he asked. Poirot smiled faintly. "Non. She will surface again when her conscience, or her ambition, demands it. The truth has a way of following such people like a shadow." He leaned back, eyes half closed, and for a long moment there was silence save for the steady rhythm of the train. Then, almost absently, he added, "Do you recall the chessboard in the library, Hastings?" "Yes, of course," Hastings said. "The one with the missing rook." Poirot nodded. "Exactly so. But tell me, did it not strike you as strange that a player so precise as Lord Winstanley would leave a game unfinished? One piece missing, one move incomplete?" Hastings frowned, thinking. "I suppose I didn't think much of it." Poirot opened his eyes, a spark of mischief, or perhaps melancholy within them. "Then think of it now, mon ami. The rook is the piece that guards the corner. It moves in straight lines, steady and unyielding. But when it falls, the king is left exposed. I believe someone removed it deliberately years ago, perhaps not from the board, but from life." Hastings looked utterly baffled. "I'm afraid you've lost me entirely." Poirot smiled. "That is as it should be. Some truths, Hastings, must remain half-seen, like the moon reflected in water. To stare too long is to lose sight of where one stands." The train curved around a hill, the evening light glinting briefly through the clouds. Poirot's gaze drifted to the distant horizon, where the sea shimmered faintly silver. "Dover," he said softly. "The port of departure, the threshold between guilt and forgetting. She will cross, I think, but she will not escape herself. No one ever does." As the train rattled on, Hastings found himself watching Poirot closely. The way his hands folded neatly upon his cane, the precision of his stillness, the faint melancholy in his expression. "You know, Poirot, he said after a long pause. "Sometimes I wonder if you actually want the mysteries to end." Poirot chuckled quietly, eyes still on the passing world. "Ah, but Hastings, the mysteries, they never end. They simply change their disguises. Today it is Oxford Hall. Tomorrow, another house, another hut. Humanity, mon ami, is the greatest puzzle of all." The train entered a tunnel, plunging them into momentary darkness. When the light returned, Poirot was still gazing out the window, though his reflection seemed almost ghostly now, his thoughts already elsewhere, perhaps across the sea, where another story waited to begin. And far behind them, in the great empty halls of Oxford, the wind passed through the library once more, stirring the ash upon the hearth. The ivory knight had fallen from the mantle lying now on its side upon the rug, its base cracked clean through. From inside, something tiny and forgotten shifted loose, a folded slip of paper that fluttered to the floor, bearing 3 words in fading ink. "Forgive me, Clara.